Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to be looking at one of the three stories included in the recently released game by Starny Games out of Ukraine called Ukraine War Stories. These stories are culminations, or conglomerations, I guess would be the better word, of reports and instances that have occurred in three of the major battles that have occurred in Ukraine to date. The first one we're going to be going through today is going to be the battle for Hostomel in the Hostomel, city of Hostomel in the Kiev Oblast, just outside the capital city of Ukraine. And just to put an understanding behind where the stories that you're about to see are generated from, they have cited their sources for the three stories that they do have. One is for the battle in Bucha, Hostomel, and Mariupol. What they have done is they've given the sightings and links to the stories that you will be seeing, and essentially what they have done, what the developers have done, is taken all this information and combined it together to make a single story track. With this, some things will be different. Like, just as an example, this one here we are going to come across during this story. I have done the first few slides of this story just to see how it works, and this gentleman we do come across, but he goes by a different name in the story. So when I point him out, I will say that this is the gentleman that's actually in place of Vadim Suslov, a brave Ukrainian who unfortunately lost his life to a Russian sniper early in the war. The Battle of Hostomel, for those that don't know, did occur between February 25th and it's either April 1st or April 2nd. I believe April 1st, the Ukrainian government declared the Russians had fled. But then I believe it was the Ministry of Defense later stated on the 2nd that the Russian military had been fully removed from the Kiev Oblast. So with that said, and I do want to point out that for this video and the other two stories, when I do release them, they are hard. War is not anything to be made light of, and I have full respect for the people of Ukraine, the Ukrainian military, and I do not look down on the Russian people. It is the decisions of their military and government and military leaders and their government that have led to this unfortunate situation. And as we now know, as we are coming late in 2022, that the people of Russia are not wanting to take part in this war. We are seeing it by young men fleeing their country. So I do not look down on those people. I do not hate them. I respect any Russian who's willing to stand up and risk their life to say, no, this war is bad. And I fully support the Ukrainian government. I know many Ukrainians in my personal life, so I know they are good people, and what has been said about them by the Russian government, I do not believe. So with that said, that is all I will get to on the politics of this war. And I'm going to actually have the comments turned off on this video and the other two videos, just for the sheer fact of I do not want to run the risk of having things said that will hurt people. So I do hope you understand and respect that if you are watching this video. So with that, let us start with the Battle of Hostomel. Sorry, just had to adjust my headphones. Okay, let's get started. Evening in February. Oleksy. Oleksy. I apologize. My Ukrainian name pronunciation is not the greatest. So, it was barely past 1700, but it was getting dark already. Spring was on its way in, but we were still getting early sunsets and cold nights. Another quiet evening in the house that was entirely too big for just me and my Lilia. Ever since our daughter had settled in Kiev, no surprises there. Hostomel was always too small for her. I'm just gonna turn the sound down. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna turn the music down. I'm gonna turn the sound effects down just a bit when we get to it. Sorry about that. Oh, one other thing I should point out. The objective here is to keep the mood up. Especially Oleksy. If his mood drops too low, then he loses hope and you lose the scenario. So our best bet is to try and keep him and everyone around him in the best spirits possible. Oleksy. Still, she kept in touch with us. In fact, that evening, I was just trying to figure out a present from her, a smartphone. Well, I wasn't trying anymore. I delegated the task to the neighbor's girl, Milena Mirzoyan. Looks like a Samsung. Melina is a bright girl, top of her class, at the medical university in Kiev. Much younger than my own daughter, Katya, barely in her 20s, quick-witted, and full of life. Unlike me, a tired old man. I've been an aviation engineer for 40 years before retiring, and yet those modern gadgets are beyond anything I've worked with. Now my wife, Lilia, she's the savvy one, but that evening she was preoccupied. Oleksy, she said in a worried voice, Oleksy, have you heard what Putin is saying? He recognizes those republics in Donbass. She clenched at her chest. Oh God, the Russians are going to invade. I looked over to see her watching a Russian broadcast on YouTube, and I could only roll my eyes. For the last few weeks, what Putin was saying was everyone's favorite gossip. That big war was coming, that the Russians were finally going to invade in full force. That's why Milena left Kiev a day ago and came to join her parents in Hostomel. Many people fled the capital in the last few days. It was as if everybody expected Kiev to be bombed off the face of the earth. Lily, please. Nothing's going to happen, I said when I caught Melena's glance. She was afraid too. And we can actually see that here. The ladies are sad. He's still confident. Mr. Borisov, they've got so many troops on our borders. They wouldn't keep them there if they were just bluffing, said Melina. That's exactly how bluff works, child, I chuckled. We have nothing to fear because. And here we choose our responses, and we can actually see the consequences. So, each one will raise their spirits by 1, but we have to choose which one. Alright, time for the attack is passed. Putin will try to end next Donbass at most. If Putin invades the UN, we'll eat him alive. If he does, he doesn't have nearly enough forces. I mean, we know the UN did sanction Russia after the fact. But would standard Ukrainian know that? Not sure. That is technically true. Putin should have attacked in January. I'm going to go with this one. If Putin recognizes those republics, don't you think that's all he's... Sorry. If Putin recognizes those republics, don't you think that's all he's after? He's keeping forces on our border to keep our line stretched thin, so that we can easily take Donbass. So that he can easily take Donbass and freeze the war for another 8 years. I tried giving the girls a reassuring smile. In retrospect, it may have looked a little smug. And we can see the girls are now uncertain. Lilia, you know, at least I took first aid courses and stocked up on some gauze. That'll be useful, right, darling? She looked at Melina, who replied with enthusiastic nodding. You could have done something useful as well instead of buying more model planes. I just chuckled. I could tell she was just worried. She didn't mean it in one bit. I looked up as if to... look, if you're so worried, I'll go get the car fueled up. Say on Thursday? We weren't using our car much except to buy groceries, so the near empty tank didn't seem like an issue. With my bum leg, I barely left home anyway. And Lilia worked as a teacher. Her students were all on distance learning. Then we'll go have a vacation in the Carpathians. A week? No, 2 weeks. Until this whole deal resolves itself, and you'll see that I was right. Melina. Stocking up on fuel is a good idea, Melina chimed in. My dad is stocking up as well before the prices rise even more. I nodded. I didn't believe the war was coming, and if I did, could I do anything to prevent it? But there was something I could do. Help everyone stay calm. So Melina's mood has gone to 2, and Lilia's mood has gone to 2. First day of the war. So this would be February 24th. There was a deafening noise outside, wrestling me from sleep instantly. At first I didn't believe my own ears. I thought I hadn't woken up at all, and this was just all a nightmare. But then I heard the noise again. Explosions. Lilia. Oh God. Lyosha. They're bombing the airfield. Look, those helicopters. They're shooting rockets. I looked around and saw my wife. She was already running towards the window. Did she hear it first? She was always the quicker thinker between us two. After a night of sleep, stepping on my bum leg felt even worse than usual. I limped towards Lily and looked into the window. I didn't have the eyesight to make out the details, but I saw helicopters swarming over the Hostomel airfield, launching bright flares all around them. Not rockets, flares. They do it so our soldiers don't shoot them down. They're fixing to deploy the airborne troops. Lily covered her mouth with her hands and looked at me. I don't think I've ever seen her so confused and scared. Pack our things. We might have to leave town. As my wife ran around the house packing up everything of any value, I was trying to process what was happening. The war had begun. I had seen it with my own eyes, but I still couldn't comprehend it. I was so convinced that the Russians would never act upon their threats. What a fool I've been. There was gunfire coming from the airfield. It snapped me back to reality. I had to do something. When I went to check up on Lily, I saw her hands were shaking. I had to calm her down, or at least make sure that she didn't forget to pack anything important. On the other hand, I never got around to refueling our car, and only had enough petrol to drive to the nearest fueling station. I know I should go ask the neighbors for gasoline, but if they get stuck on the road, then they'll be attacked by the Russians. Finding the medicine is good. No, I'm gonna do this one, get the medicine. With a sigh, I joined Lily in packing up our things. We couldn't afford to forget anything, as if we didn't know where we'd eventually end up, and if getting supplies would be a problem. We talked very little. I felt enormous shame for claiming just a few days ago that the war wasn't coming. Lily didn't accuse me of it, but I only felt worse because of it. I would have liked I would have liked her to I would have liked to her to state the obvious, that I was a big damned fool. But no, when we were done, she just sat on the bed, her hands wrapped around her shoulders, and she stared out the window. As I checked my bags, I noticed that we didn't pack our med kit. Without telling Lily anything, I just quietly went to the kitchen and retrieved our medicine. That should be all. I put my hand on my wife's shoulder. The shooting outside had quieted down, and everything seemed to be normal again. But it didn't stay that way. Come evening, the shooting around us got so loud, leaving by car seemed to be suicide. Our only option was to wait for the president's address and hope the situation gets clearer before the weekend. So Alexi's mood dropped one, and they gained some medicine. Alexi, what will we do? Lily complains, sniffling away the last of her tears. Did you hear it? Did you hear how loud it was? How terrible. I nodded, and I hugged Lilia closer. I sure heard it. Around 3 a.m., when we were sleeping in the basement, a shell hit our house. I don't know what it was, but it shook the whole place. I was crawling around looking for my cane, wondering if we should stay put or run, when Lilia was covering her ears and screaming. Then, when we were sure the walls weren't tumbling down on us, she started crying. This would all be over soon, I hoped. But at that time, all I could do was hold her close. The neighbors. The very next morning, when fighting had quieted down, I heard the knock on our basement door. The neighbors came to visit us, the whole Mirzoyan family, Melina and her parents. Alexei, Lilia, David, the father of the family, walked up to me and firmly shook my hand. How are you two doing? Are you all right? We saw your house get hit, and thank the Almighty you weren't there. No kidding, I sighed. We have to leave, David. It's getting too dangerous. David's wife, Olha, chimed in. We can't leave, Alexei Fedorovich. We've spoken with the Territorial Defense Office. They said it's too dangerous. There are already talks about Russians shooting at cars. I wanted to curse. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sure, the war had been going for 8 years now, but it was in Donbass, on the edge of the country. Now the Russians were taking their planes and tanks and bombs all the way up to Kyiv. I shook my head. Tell me, did they take the Antonov airport? If they did, the road to Kyiv would be wide open. We'd be seeing thousands, if not 10,000s, of men and vehicles rolling out in the next few days. No, my friend, they didn't. It's quite a story, really, David said, and motioned for his wife and daughter to carry on without him. They brought us some supplies and took them downstairs. David, meanwhile, told me the news. They had yet to make it to the TV, but the gossip had already spread around town. The Russians took the Antonov airport, but it's all shelled to bits, unusable. They won't be landing anything there or using any of our planes. I gasped, and David cut himself off. He didn't need to continue. Maria, too? Is it gone? I've worked for the Antonov Design Bureau for 40 years. Aviation was my life. Still is. However, little of that life is left in me. And nothing the Antonov Bureau ever made came even close to the AN-225 Miria, the biggest cargo plane ever designed. A marvel of engineering, Soviet, Ukrainian, it didn't matter. Miria was a treasure. And I should point out, look this plane up. It was a beautiful plane. I thought it was terrible waste that it was barely flown in our 3 decades of independence, but that day I learned of a truly terrible waste. I felt a sting in my chest and clutched at it. David quickly rushed to support me. He helped me sit down on the ground. I couldn't talk at first, so he continued. What a rotten world, huh? I told my girl to wait out the war in Hostomel if it came, and now the war has come here. He reached into his jacket inner pocket, and before I knew it, there was a bottle in his hand. I was appalled at first, drinking at a time like this, but David kept talking. Nothing is sacred to those Russians. Destroying Miria is bad enough, but you know what they do to women? If the Russians get here, if they do, I can't calm my girls down, and I can't protect them either. I don't even have a gun. He reached to uncork the bottle, drawing my attention to it. It was the finest Armenian cognac money could buy. I mean, this would be best to bring up the spirits of the ladies, but I have a feeling they're going to need the alcohol later. Yeah. Let's do this one. Muriel was a terrible loss. I didn't know what to think about it, but drowning my sorrow in alcohol was not an option. If David was so sure the war would only last a few days, I said, surely his cognac was better spent celebrating victory. David frowned, but he had to agree. He even told me to keep the bottle. That way he'd be sure it would be survived until our victory. He wasn't wrong there. I barely drank, and we never kept any alcohol at the home. So when I came to the basement to stash the bottle, Lily had some questions. It's a gift from David Mirzoyan. He said we'll open it when it's time to celebrate our victory. I said. I didn't tell her about the Muria. Lily gave me a sideways look, but soon I realized I was being honest. She smiled. That's a wonderful idea. Give him my thanks. The day drew to a close, and me and David were parting ways just before the curfew. Shots were already ringing out somewhere far. That night, like the one before, was going to get loud. Suddenly we heard the sound of approaching vehicles. What do you know? Our armed forces have finally arrived, David asked. And looked out onto the road. Then his face dropped. As the armored vehicles rolled down the road, we could see the brightly white Z's painted on them. So we now have alcohol. David's mood dropped to a 1. Lily's mood is up to a 3. It's been a week since the war had begun. Just a week. An entire week. Time seemed to have slowed down, and every new day that came seemed longer than the last. Deep inside, my fear was growing. Fear for myself, my family, my home, my country. Fear for the future. We heard bombs exploding outside, and we wondered if the next one would hit us, if we'd survive it. This constant wait for death left us with neither energy nor willingness to do anything. All we did was keep checking the news. I don't know what we wanted to see there, as good news was short in supply. But any new information served to distract us from the horrors around us. That's what we were doing, sitting in our basement when my phone rang. Me and Lily flinched from the sound. The happy melody our daughter picked for the ringtones sounded terribly out of place. Sacrilegious, even. It was our neighbor, David. Oleksky, hide your phone. The Ruskies are going around town taking them away. He hung up, and I quickly hid the phone under the floorboards. David's timing was impeccable. Upstairs in our house, we heard the loud crash and heavy footsteps. The Russians broke into our home. We turned off the light, leaving me and Lily in total darkness, and listened. Lyosha, what do we do? Lily whispered. I heard growing panic in her voice. In the dark, I found her hand and squeezed it. Let's be quiet. Maybe they'll leave us alone. We weren't so lucky. In a few moments, someone knocked on the basement door. It was a heavy sound. They must have been knocking with the rifle butt. Open up, quick, or we're breaking the door. I didn't want to let the Russians in, but I didn't want to antagonize armed men either. We had to turn on the lights and open the door. 3 Russian soldiers descended into the basement. They were armed. They looked ready to use their weapons at the drop of a hat. Lily backed away from them, so did I, using a wall for support. One of the soldiers noticed my limp. What's wrong with your leg, old man? He must have thought it was a combat wound. Hurts to step on it. Old injury. Spent half my life with a cane. He nodded and looked around our basement. We're searching the houses, looking for Nazis and saboteurs. Do you know any Nazis in this city? I'm not going to antagonize the Russians. Just play dumb. I tried to make something up, hoping they'd simply leave us alone. Sorry, we don't talk to our neighbors much. We wouldn't know of any Nazis. As I spoke, I felt my hands start to shake. I was too old for such stress. Then I thought about the Russians' reaction if they noticed it, and thought I was lying. This only made the matters worse. My vision got dark, but suddenly Lily came to my rescue. What are you doing? Can't you see he's worried out of his mind? My husband is a hero of this socialist labor. His father reached Berlin in 1945, and you're asking him about Nazis? The soldier looked at me, then at Lilia. Then he spat upon the floor and commanded the rest to leave. I slid to the floor, down the basement wall. There was a ringing in my ears, and the room was spinning out of control. Deafened by my own heartbeat, I could barely hear Lily when she said, "Here, drink this. It should help." A few sips of cold water did bring me back to life. When my vision cleared up, I looked at Lily with gratitude. "Thank you, darling. What would I do without you?" Lily didn't say anything. She just smiled and squeezed my palm. I thought once again how lucky I was to have such a wife. No changes. There was still fighting, but only on the outskirts. Lily had never gotten used to it, but I did. There is still fighting was something I kept telling myself, as I saw Russians rummage through the houses on our street. A unit of Chechens, Kadroyevets, as they are called, even dropped by our wreck of a house. There wasn't much to steal, but they stole it anyway. Me and Lily had enough sense not to argue, and so they just took what they wanted and left. The Mirzoyan's turn hadn't come yet, but they knew they would not be so lucky. That's why I couldn't refuse David when he asked that his daughter stay with us a few days. Me and Lilia were just a tired old couple, and with my leg, I wasn't much of a threat. The Russians were done with us. Thank you so much, Oleksky. These people are monsters, David shared as Lily helped Melina to make it her way into our basement. Have you heard the word around town? Of course I had. The Russians took whatever they wanted. They ate anything that could be eaten. They drank anything that could be drank. And they took anything that they could resell back home. I wasn't born yesterday. I expected it as much. It was war. I could accept it. But what they did to women, I refuse to accept. Are you sure you don't want to join us with Olga? We'll make room, I offered. He shook his head. No, Fedorovich. You just keep Melina hidden for a few days, okay? Me and Olga will manage somehow. We'll keep real quiet. He put his finger to his lip and smiled. I smiled back at him as he walked out into the street and waved him goodbye. There was a pop, like a firecracker going off in the distance. David fell to the ground and screamed. What I did next, I could never be proud of. I threw myself towards the basement entrance and slammed the door shut. Downstairs, Lily yelped at the loud bang. My chest began to hurt and I clutched it with one hand. A second distant pop, and David stopped screaming. I think I waited hours. Melina was downstairs covering her mouth, looking in mute horror, looking with David's eyes. I think I waited for hours. When I finally peeked through the door, slow and careful, making no sound, there was David, all right, and two Russians. One standing over David, and another rifling through his pockets. "What did you do that for?" the standing one asked. He sounded calm, bored even. "He was a Nazi, can't you tell? I know them when I see them." The other shrugged in the dark. He was not being serious. I could hear him grin. They laughed, and then they both lit themselves a cigarette. "This is the gentleman that was in that news clip that I showed at the start." I closed the basement door and kept it closed through the night. Melina cried for hours. Lily held her hand and did her best not to cry too. But in the morning, she too joined in when she heard Olha's wailing outside. In the morning, there was fighting on the outskirts again, but close to us. Sometimes bullets whizzed through the air above our fence. When I opened the door to the basement, Olha crawled out towards us on all fours. But something had to be done about David. You have to do this. Never leave a friend to be eaten by the dogs. I could not leave my friend like that, so I got a shovel and crawled towards David. As I dug a grave for him, I had to stop at least 24 times. The air would get too hot, the shots too loud, and the ground would shake so hard it knocked us off our feet. In the end, it was barely a grave. David's broad Armenian shoulders barely fit in it. It seemed like the earth itself refused to believe he was dead, but it had to suffice. And while it was little relief for the girls, we did David good. The dogs weren't going to get him. By the 10th day of the war, our supplies were dwindling. Me and Lily had always tried to manage with little excess. We had very little food stocked up. Why would we? The shops nearby had everything we needed, but now there were twice as many of us. The Mirzoians brought some of their own supplies with them, but it wasn't enough for 4. Someone had to get us some supplies. Lily didn't want to let me go. There was still fighting in Hostomel. Every day we heard explosions, machine gun fire, and artillery barrages. My wife even wanted to go looking for supplies by herself, but I managed to talk her out of it. If anybody was going to take such a risk, it had to be me. I told her the Russians wouldn't give me a second thought. There was no use in shooting an old cripple. It would all just be a waste of ammo. I wasn't a threat to them. I was trying to convince myself of this as much as her. Eventually, Lilia saw things my way, or at least pretended she did. Olha and Melina talked very little in these last few days. David's death was very heavy on them. With him gone, they were on their own. I had doubled the responsibility now. Melina cried a lot. Looking at the dark circles under her eyes, I thought David should have taken her to someone else, someone stronger and healthier. When the gunfire had quieted down, I took my cane and grabbed my old backpack. Lily, stay quiet down here and keep everyone inside. I will be back soon, I promise. I will see if there's anything useful nearby, and be right back. She nodded, barely holding back her tears. After what happened to David, she feared even for my life even more. It was quiet outside, and after the dark, damp basement, the sunlight was blinding. When my eyes did adjust to it, I just wished they hadn't. Many houses on our street were ruined, either heavily damaged or simply gone. The intact ones had all been broken into and looted. The Russians took everything. Clothing, household appliances, tools, even children's toys. I couldn't understand what kind of person would do that. I saw ransacked cars everywhere. Many of them were even missing their wheels. Some were shot or flattened by armored vehicles. Inside one such car, I saw someone's mangled remains. I looked away in horror and disgust. The streets were also full of bodies. People in civilian clothing were strewn about among debris like broken dolls. I had no idea why they were killed. Were they in the wrong place at the wrong time like David? Did they draw someone's anger? I refuse to believe this is all happening on the streets of my Hostomel. And yet, I still had a task to complete. I had to decide what to look for. We had a pressing need for many things, but with my leg, I would only manage a single purposeful trip. God was looking for food, but alcohol you can trade with the soldiers. We have medicine. We don't have fuel. But you're not getting out for another month and a half. Alcohol, I'll take. Nope. I guess it's just gas. Our best option would be to evacuate and leave this nightmare behind, so I headed for the nearest station for some fuel. I tried not to think of what would happen if the Russians saw me carrying fuel around town. Getting to the gas station took me more than an hour. I found it ransacked, same as any others. Building along the way, broken doors, heaps of trash rolling in the wind, and abandoned cars. Sadly, the station was all out of gas. Whenever I tried, I couldn't even get a few drops of fuel. I decided to try my luck with another gas station closer to the highway. However, as I walked in that direction, I soon noticed a tall smokestack rising over the rooftops. The gas station I was counting on was burning. The only option was to drain some fuel from the abandoned cars. This took up about an hour, since I kept checking my surroundings, but in the end my jerry can was full. Another empty car had a bag of groceries in its truck. Perhaps the owners were trying to leave Hostomel, but could not. I didn't want to think much about it. Priority was getting back home safely. As I walked back home, the fighting resumed, and judging by the sounds it was headed my way, I sped up to the best of my ability. A few times from the explosions would ring out in a single street away from me, making the ground shake under my feet. I wanted to drop the supplies I found and try to run, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I couldn't come back empty-handed. When I finally reached my home safely, I couldn't believe my luck. It was already getting dark outside. My leg was on fire. My back was killing me. But Lily's adorning gaze made up for any discomfort. Her look made me feel like a young man in his prime again. For the first time in forever, I felt useful. And he got some fuel. So we have fuel, we have medicine, we have alcohol. Mobile connection was down more often than it was not, and even then we had to go outside to catch honey. Even so, the gossip was spread quickly around Hostomel. The fighting had died down. The Russians had free run of the town. And that's when the news started coming in. News I didn't want to believe. People said a man was shot for not showing the Russians his phone. Another man did show them his, and the Russians shot him over something they found in it. Another man was shot for wearing camouflage pants. Another for asking the soldiers what they were doing in Ukraine. I did not know what to think of it. I did not want to believe it. Most of the soldiers in the village were barely adults, yet those who shot David Mirzoyan were barely adults too. And every night we heard more gunshots, and every night we heard women screaming. Poor Melina was terrified. She kept beating herself up over heading to Hostomel before the war. Kiev, we were told, was still holding out, but Hostomel, as we soon found out, Hostomel was lost. One evening we sat huddled in the basement, me, Olha, Lily, Melina, who hid in the farthest corner, fearing the worst. We were always ready to hide her under the blankets if she wasn't here, as if she wasn't here. And the Russians were rowdy that evening. Their gunfire and frenzied shouting echoed across the town. Suddenly there was someone banging at the door, and mere seconds later it flew open. Melina hid herself instantly, and the rest of us jumped to our feet. We heard commotion coming from upstairs. Someone's slow and messy descent. A Russian. When he stumbled into the basement, I recoiled from the stench of sweat and alcohol. He could barely stand as he looked at us. His sleepy blue eyes were almost white. Good evening. So what's it going to be? He slurred, as if continuing a point he'd made before. Somewhere upstairs, if not even hours ago. Are there any girls left in this town? My heart sank. Lily and Olha just blinked at each other. The man stood at the exit, trapping us inside. His rifle was at his shoulder, way out of our reach. Then he moved across the basement, towards the bedding, where Melina was hiding. My heart sank. Luckily, Lilia spoke up. What are you celebrating? I was baffled at first, but then I too put the dots together. The smell of alcohol, the shots outside. The soldier was already barely standing and he came to us. As it turned out, that's why he went for the bedding. To land onto with a loud, tired groan. I couldn't breathe from straining. Melina was barely a meter away from him, hidden under a pile of blankets. We took Hostomel. Ha! We took everything up to Kiev. It's next, soon your president. He grinned and drew his thumb across his dirt-caked neck. Him and the rest of the fucking Nazis. We had to keep the boy distracted and get him to leave us alone as soon as possible. So we kept him talking, got him even more drunk. Let's get drop me to 0. I just fear getting him more drunk won't work. Good. All the rest of those Nazis, my Lily chirped. Just be careful, boys. You must have someone waiting for you back home, right? Parents, surely? Do you have siblings? I chimed in. The boy was neither intelligent nor well-spoken, but we listened to every word, and when he was done answering, we asked more questions. The stories he told us were awful. The boy didn't seem to come from a happy household, and his home village was somewhere in North Russia, was sparse on young women. He said he was conscripted a year ago and wasn't even supposed to be in Ukraine, but he was having the time of his life. Take whatever you want, eat whatever you want, fuck the local girls, shoot every once in a while, and when I go back, they'll give me a medal for it, he grinned. I wanted to strangle him. Our talk lasted for so long, I was afraid Melina would suffocate under all the blankets, or give herself away, but she did well. She later told us she was shaking the whole time, but I didn't notice. I believe I lost several kilograms from the sheer stress, but finally the boy seemed to forget what he came for. Just then we heard someone else walk through the open basement door. Another Russian. He too was armed. Siri, get the fuck up. Sarge is looking for you. What the fuck are you even doing here? Finding us some girls for the night, like yesterday. I told the fucking sergeant where I was going. The man got on his feet, grumbled under his breath. I winced at the crass exchange, but said nothing. This wasn't the time or place to tell youngsters to mind their language. Thankfully, the soldiers were about to leave anyway. Well, leave those fat old hags alone, you idiot. We found someone younger. Shit. Oleski loses hope. It took all my hope. It took my hope a while to erode, but when it did, there was no going back. At first, they promised that the war would last for 3 days, then a week, then until next weekend. Then the Russians took Hostomel and were already shelling Kiev. Like David predicted, it was all going to be over soon, but not in the way we expected. I just knew it would end with Zelensky dead, and the population put through filtration camps. And there, nobody would care that I'm a hero of socialist labor. Oleski Borisov. loses hope. The Borisov family died with the city. You can replay this and try for a better outcome. Maybe another day. And that was the first chapter of Ukraine War Stories. I'll try to get the next 2 out in the coming days. These are not an easy record, so do please understand as I go through them. And I have been told that Hostomel is the easiest of the two to read through. These are going to be rough. So, yeah. Well, I want to say thank you, and please like, subscribe, and I hope you'll come watch the next video. Thank you.